worked at a local bakery cafe in my early 20s. It was just a small place called Night Owl that served coffee and pastries, with a few cozy tables inside for dining in. In all honesty, the pastries weren't anything extraordinary. The only thing that was really special about the place was that it was open 24/7. So night owls and not-so-sober people would drift in throughout the night. I often worked alone, but I didn't mind it. Actually, I preferred it. None of the baking was hard to do, and whenever business was slow, I could usually sketch in my notebook while waiting around. This night was no different than any other, at least to start. I headed in at 9 in the evening and took over for Leah, the day manager. There were no special tasks or anything that I had to do that night. And with it being a Thursday, I was prepared for a relaxed shift. I prepped some of the display cases in the front and just waited for any customers to come through. I got a few regulars in the next couple hours, but then it went completely quiet. No walk-ins or even people passing by outside. I pretty much sat on a stool behind the counter and sketched in my notebook the whole time, occasionally glancing up at the rain pattering against the windows. But around 1 in the morning, I heard the bell by the door chime, which happened every time someone opened the door. I got up and walked to the front where the counter was, but I stopped as soon as I could see the main room. Nobody was in there. I stood in place and looked side to side, but there wasn't anyone at all. A short smile broke across my face as I walked further up and carefully checked that nobody came in. I found it funny, like I must have been so used to hearing that sound all night long that my brain was playing tricks on me now. Being sure it was nothing, I went back to my stool behind the counter. I really didn't think about it at all after that. For the next 15 minutes, there were still no customers until I heard the bell chime again. This time I wasn't even drawing when it happened, so I knew I actually heard it. I got up and walked into the main room, but stopped in confusion again. Nobody was in there. After a second, I walked up to the front door and opened it, sticking my head outside and looking up and down the sidewalk that went along the building. There was nobody out there, not even any cars in the parking lot, just rain coming down steadily. I wouldn't say I was really scared or creeped out, but more so just really confused. I messed around with the door for a little bit, trying to see if it would chime without opening, but it didn't seem to. This was really weird, but I didn't know what else to do about it. I stayed up front for a while, at least 30 minutes, waiting for the door to chime again, but it never did. So I went back behind the counter. It was between 2 and 3 in the morning, which was always the slowest time of the night. Unsurprisingly, once I was in the back again, only a few minutes went by before the door chimed again. This time I stayed sitting and listened for anyone. I didn't hear anything, but just to be safe, I called out, "Hello, is someone out there?" I got no response. I figured it was just the door doing whatever the hell it was doing. So I just ignored it and stayed back and continued working on my sketch of the empty cafe. Somehow there wasn't a single customer for a whole hour after that. So basically the past 3 hours were completely dead. It was 4 in the morning. So for my last hour, I had to start prepping everything for the next shift. I got up and went to the front. I started counting the register from the few orders I had at the beginning of my shift. But while I was there, I felt strange. Something just felt off. I kept looking up at the empty room ahead of me and back at the kitchen behind me, feeling like I was being watched or something. I thought it was just the unusual nature of the night I was having, you know, with the door and everything. I was just thankful my shift was over soon. Another couple minutes went by when I suddenly heard a soft squeak on the floor behind me. It was just like a wet boot stepping on the tiled ground, which instantly sent a chill through me and made me quickly turn around. I felt my breath leave my lungs. There was a man standing just 5 or 6 feet away from me. He had a rain-soaked trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat dripping water onto his shoulders, shadowing much of his face except for his eyes. His eyes were piercing and hollow. I don't know if he was delirious or on something, but he clearly wasn't all there right now. Then I saw his left hand was clutching a strange metal object, maybe a letter opener or some kind of tool. His knuckles were white from how tightly he was clenching it. I stayed motionless, trying not to escalate anything. But after several seconds of him not making a move and just staring at me, I decided to speak. "Hey, listen. You can have the cash from the register. I won't say anything. Please just let me go," I said, trying to say anything I could to get out of this. He just stood there, though, still clenching the object and having that 1,000-yard stare. Honestly, I think I was even more terrified because he clearly wasn't some normal guy. There was no predicting what he might do. The counter I was at was L-shaped, extending toward the back where he was. So to run away, I'd actually have to run a couple feet toward him and around the counter, then back toward the front door. With him only being 5 feet from me, he could easily grab me or attack me if I tried. So I did the next best option. I basically dove over top the counter. It wasn't pretty, but I guess it kind of worked. I slammed into the ground and got up. The guy was already coming at me, with a face of uncontrollable rage and desperation. I ran out the door and only got a few seconds away before I heard him get out the door as well. He was too close for me to even try getting inside my car, which was behind the building. I just kept running, making it to the road, and hoping a car might drive by and help. But at some point, he stopped chasing. I don't know when, because I was so focused on sprinting and not looking back. I called the cops and waited at the road for them to get there. It took about 5 minutes. The guy was gone, but I guess after chasing me, he went back inside the cafe and just demolished the place. Everything was trashed, and he left out the back door, where he then scraped his metal object all over the side of my car. It's likely he was watching me inside the shop through the windows from a distance, and using the door as a distraction, hoping to slip in without being noticed. Admittedly, it worked perfectly, which makes me feel pretty stupid. It's also pretty creepy knowing that there was about an hour gap between the last time the door chimed and when I saw him. So he was probably hiding inside the cafe that whole time. It's really strange, though, because I really had no idea who he was. I thought he was just some random person, but his actions seemed oddly directed toward me. Maybe it was just a wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. I don't know. They never found him. I didn't stay working there very long after that, fearing that he might come back. This was a couple years ago, when I was working 2 jobs to save up for my tuition. I had a stable part-time position at the Marine Research Center. but did food deliveries as a way to make a little bit extra cash whenever I had time. Actually, I found myself doing sometimes 30 hours a week just doing deliveries every day after classes. Marine biology equipment isn't cheap, you know. This night I started after finishing my lab work at 6:30. It was a pretty good night, to be honest. I was getting a lot of good orders with generous tips. So really, I should have just taken the rest of the night off and given myself a break. But I was greedy. I kept working, hoping to continue getting well-paying orders. By the time it was 11, it had slowed down a lot, and the last few deliveries I'd done were just average. I really wanted to end on a good one, though. So I kept driving around the coastal town until one came up that was decent. Finally, when one did, I quickly accepted it. Almost $20 for a delivery, 15 minutes away. Who wouldn't take that? Once I got the seafood platter from the restaurant, I started heading to the address. The roads were, of course, very quiet and empty at this time of night, so the drive there was smooth. However, it took me toward a rocky section of coastline that I wasn't even aware had houses on it. I made sure I was on the right route several times, though, just to be sure I was going the right way. When I got to the final turn, it was on a narrow, winding path going along the cliffside. I drove a little ways down until there was a gate. It was one of those small ones, basically just 2 stone pillars on either side of the path, with a chain running between them. The chain on these wasn't up, though, so I drove through. My headlights weren't the best, and the thickening fog wasn't helping, so I couldn't see too far ahead. But not too long past the gate, I pulled into a small, gravelly area. I was confused. It definitely was not leading to a house. I pulled in and put my car in park, then looked out my windows all around. There was a sign on one end. This was the old Bay Point Lighthouse parking area. I'd done deliveries to strange places before, but I always thought lighthouses were abandoned around here, or at least not inhabited. And I didn't see anyone here to deliver the order to. Just as I was starting to question what exactly I was supposed to do here, my phone started ringing. It was the customer. I picked up. The voice on the other end was a deep male voice, very gravelly and rough, almost to a point where it was hard to understand them. He said he saw on the map that I'd parked and asked if I could see him. I said no, to which he explained he was staying at the lighthouse just up the path, and I should be able to spot its light if I walk a little closer. I said all right, realizing this was probably why the tip was so large. I did mention to him that I thought the lighthouse was decommissioned, but he said this one was privately owned and maintained. I wasn't very familiar with lighthouse regulations, so I didn't know any better. I didn't see any reason he'd have to lie. I turned off my car and got out with his bag of food. I quickly realized that it was really dark and foggy, and I needed to use my phone as a flashlight to see where I was going. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks below filled the air, and the smell of salt water was strong. There was only one path leading out from the parking area, so at least I couldn't get lost. I started walking. It was eerily quiet except for the waves. I expected to hear someone moving about or perhaps maintenance sounds from the lighthouse, but I didn't. It was just the wind and the ocean. Then I saw the light, a dim yellow glow in the fog, not the powerful beam you'd expect from a working lighthouse. Oddly, it wasn't coming from the top of a tower, as I'd expected. It was at ground level somewhere ahead. I couldn't see too far down the path to see if there was a direct route going to it or not, but I just started walking toward the glow. As I got closer, things were getting really strange. First of all, I didn't hear any voices. And secondly, once I got even closer, I didn't see anyone. It was just a small lantern burning on a rock. No lighthouse keeper, no lighthouse. Literally nothing but this old brass lantern. I barely got the chance to whisper, "What the hell?" under my breath before I heard stones shifting from somewhere in the fog. I jolted my head toward the sound. There was someone there, but too far for the light to reach, and the faint figure that I could make out was standing still, like they were trying not to be seen. I felt really uneasy. "Hey, I'm the delivery driver. I'll just put your order down over here." I yelled out and set the bag on the ground. As I did, they suddenly decided to show themselves and walk toward me. The man was tall with white hair and weathered skin. He apologized and said he didn't see me walking up. It was that same deep, gravelly voice from the phone. His smile was disturbing, like he was faking it. And it was really strange that he only showed himself once he knew I saw him. Nothing added up. I stumbled over a few words, but as he got closer and closer, I just decided to turn and run. He called out several times in this creepy, overly nice voice, asking me to come back, and that he had something special to show me from his collection. I didn't stop until I got to the car. I fumbled around with my keys in my shaky hands as I tried to hurry in and turn it on. I backed out and pulled back onto the gravel path to leave, but had to slam on my brakes. The chain was latched across the pillars now, blocking the exit. I stared at it for way too long, trying to think if I could get out and unlatch it, or what to do. Then I heard footsteps coming up behind my car. I didn't even look. I just floored it onto the grass and made it around the pillars. It was a tight squeeze because there was a short drop-off really close to the sides. So if I messed up, my car would have slid down the cliff and maybe gotten stuck or worse. Once I was back on the path, I sped away. I didn't know what that was back there, but I was stupid not to call the police, even though I think that if I did, they likely would have been long gone anyway. The following morning, I did a little investigating and found that the Bay Point area was completely undeveloped. There was no lighthouse there at all, functioning or otherwise. To me, that confirms the horrible nature of the situation I was in. What he intended to do is unknown, and still haunts me to think about what could have happened on that foggy cliff that night. I work at an astronomical observatory. It's at a small complex on top of a remote hilltop outside the city. My job is to just monitor the equipment and make sure all the systems stay operational during night hours. If anything stops working, I head to the dome rooms to usually just give the equipment a quick reset. It's a really simple and easy job. And because it's overnight and just me, I can really do whatever I want so long as I'm constantly checking the status of all the telescope systems. Although I'm sure you can tell just how lonely and boring it can get sometimes. By the time this happened, I'd already seriously considered quitting several times, but forced myself to stick with it. The observatory had some of the best equipment for viewing certain star clusters. and Professor Wolfgang had promised me credit on the upcoming research paper if I maintained the night shifts. Anyway, this night I drove over to the complex at my usual 10 p.m. The building was at the end of a long, winding road and surrounded by pine trees, so there were never any cars or people in the area. I parked and headed up to the control room. This week I had a documentary series on streaming that I'd been binging during my entire shifts. So after giving the equipment a few checks, I immediately set up my laptop and started watching my show. For reference, there's usually no issues with any of the systems during my shift. Since it's overnight and the equipment is mostly automated, there's less that can go wrong. I'd say maybe twice a month there would be a malfunction, and it'd only be a single system that I can quickly just reset and get working again. I think I got through just about 2 episodes of my documentary, so it was about 2 hours in when I saw a warning light flash on the monitor. One of the telescope systems lost connection. I paused the show and got up. I walked downstairs and through multiple corridors until I got to the huge dome room that housed the main telescope. The warning I got had identified which specific component was offline. I walked across the room and over to the control panel. It happened to be the very last panel in the far corner of the room. And strangely, it was really obvious why it was down. The main power cable wasn't plugged in. It was laying on the ground like it had been pulled on or fallen out somehow. I really didn't know how that was possible. In all my months of having the job, I'd never seen a heavy-duty cable randomly fall out like that. It just doesn't happen. Regardless, though, of however it happened, I plugged it back in and booted up the system. Everything came back online and seemed to be working properly. The obvious and really only answer to fall back on was that it did somehow just wiggle loose from the socket. Maybe over time it slowly shook out, and it just so happened to fall out tonight. I did a quick walk through of the rest of the dome, checking for anything else while I was down there. The massive telescopes, silhouette against the moonlight, coming through the dome slit, created eerie shadows. Then I started heading back through all the corridors and back to the control room. As I was in one of the corridors, I heard an unfamiliar sound. It was almost like an old hinge squeaking open and closed somewhere in the distance. It was a little creepy sounding, especially with there being no other sounds in the entire building. Unfortunately, I didn't really know the rest of the layout of the observatory complex, so if it actually was a door, I had no way of knowing which door or where at. And although it sounded like a door, it very well could have been anything else. This was a fairly old building with lots of equipment, and often the metal supports would bend and creak in the walls or make similar sounds. It was just that exact sound I hadn't heard before. I made my way back to the control room and sat down. I double-checked the systems again, then continued my documentary. Only a few minutes passed by, and I'd barely even gotten through one scene before I heard what sounded like a couple of fast-paced footsteps scurrying through the corridor next to me. It gave me a quick jump scare, but I got up and opened the door, looking down the hallway. There was nothing there, just an empty corridor with a door on the far end. But it sounded like it was just outside of the room I was in. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep my mind off of it if I didn't take a look around. I walked toward the end and opened the door. When I did and looked down the next hallway, I barely saw the door on the other end closing, like someone had just went through it. My heart was pounding now. I cautiously walked further up and opened the door. This one led to a hallway with multiple office doors in it. "Is someone in here?" "Hello?" My voice echoed through the corridor. I took a few steps inside. It was eerily quiet. Not the slightest sound throughout the building. Were they hiding in one of these offices? As that thought creeped into my head, I got really unsettled and decided not to go any further down that hallway. I took one step back toward the door, but just when I did, one of the office doors next to me swung open. I only caught a glimpse of a figure darting out of the unlit room before I turned and booked it out of there. I could hear their footsteps echo behind me as I made it to the next corridor and into the staircase. I didn't want to risk getting trapped, so I took the emergency exit door and just ran out into the parking lot. Once I got closer to my car, I started calling the police. Whoever was in there didn't chase me out the same exit though. The cops made it pretty quick and did an extensive search of the entire complex, which took nearly half an hour, but the intruder was gone. Probably ran out through a different exit and into the woods surrounding the hilltop. Them being in there explained a lot though. The cable that had been disconnected earlier in the night was on the corner panel, which the person probably bumped into while sneaking around. The observatory did a huge investigation to review security footage and try to figure out how they got in and if they stole anything. I didn't get much information on it, however, because I'm not authorized. I think it's pretty clear that whatever they were in there for, they likely didn't want me to know and were probably planning to prevent me from discovering them. How they would have done that after leading me through the corridors, I'm fortunate enough to not know. Professor Wolfgang later told me they found signs that someone had been attempting to access the specialized equipment we use for deep space observation. Apparently, some of our recent findings had attracted unwanted attention. They increased security after that, but I still get chills thinking about being alone in that building with someone lurking in the shadows. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, where the fog rolls in every evening like clockwork. My house sits on the outskirts, perched on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The town itself isn't much, just a handful of stores, a fishing dock, and a few seaside motels scattered along the main road. The rest is all winding gravel paths leading to scattered houses and vast stretches of pine forest. Working as an illustrator allows me to spend my days at home, watching seabirds soar past my window while I draw. That particular evening, I wrapped up work around 6 and headed into town for groceries. The lighthouse's beam had just started its nightly rotation, cutting through the thickening fog. The local market was never crowded. Our town wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. As I wandered down the seafood aisle, something caught my attention. A man, probably in his mid-40s, was staring at me. At first, I dismissed it, maybe just awkward timing. But a few minutes later, in the canned goods section, I noticed him again. He walked into the empty aisle and stood just 5 or 6 feet away. He wasn't shopping, just standing there. I kept my eyes forward, but watched him from my peripheral vision. His weathered jacket reeked of fish and salt, probably one of the workers from the local fishing company. I said a quiet hello, trying to diffuse the awkwardness. He didn't respond. Something about his silence made my skin crawl. I hurried through the rest of my shopping and headed to checkout. I always park at the far end of the lot, where the view of the ocean is best. As I loaded groceries into my trunk, something felt off about the evening. The fog had grown thicker, and through its gray veil, I spotted him again. He was standing between two pickup trucks, still watching me. No shopping bags in his hands. Had he even bought anything? The drive home was tense. The coastal road was dark, except for the rhythmic flash of the lighthouse beam. I pulled into my driveway and quickly carried the first load of groceries inside. While putting things away, my father called, asking about the illustrations for his new children's book. The conversation distracted me longer than intended. When I finally went back out for the second load, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the fog, maybe 50 yards down the hill, I could make out the shape of a truck. Its lights were off, but in the brief sweeps of the lighthouse beam, I could see it clearly. That truck definitely wasn't there when I drove in. I own about 40 acres of land here, so technically, that truck was trespassing. But something told me this wasn't just someone who'd gotten lost in the fog. I quickly grabbed the remaining groceries, keeping my eyes on the truck the whole time. Inside, I opened the curtains just enough to keep watch. Over the next hour, the truck didn't move. The fog grew thicker, and the sound of the waves seemed unusually loud. Around 10, I finally convinced myself it was probably just a tourist who'd pulled off the road to rest. I went upstairs to bed, falling asleep to the distant foghorn. But at what must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up needing the bathroom. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard something that made me freeze, a creak from downstairs. I'd lived here long enough to know every sound my house made. This was new. I crept to the staircase and peered down. The moonlight filtering through the fog cast strange shadows, but there was definitely movement in the downstairs hallway. A shape shifted slightly, visible only when the lighthouse beam swept past my windows. My heart pounding, I backed away silently and closed my bedroom door. I called the police, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. For 5 endless minutes, I heard nothing. Then came the sound of careful footsteps crossing my living room floor. The police arrived with their lights, off smart thinking in the fog. There was a sudden commotion downstairs, and they caught him trying to run back to his truck. It was the same man from the store. But what made my blood run cold was what they found on him: a filleting knife and rope. He claimed he was just there to rob the place, but nothing was taken. He'd been watching me, waiting. What he really planned to do that night, I never want to know. The lighthouse beam kept sweeping across my windows as the police led him away. And somehow, the fog felt thicker than ever. Last autumn, I was on a photography assignment that took me along the rugged coastline of Maine. I had been traveling for about 4 days, capturing lighthouses and coastal scenes for a travel magazine. My final stop was the most intriguing: an old lighthouse converted into a vacation rental, perched on a remote cliff about 40 miles from the nearest town. The drive there was spectacular, but lonely. The sun was setting as I arrived, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The lighthouse stood tall against the darkening sky, its weathered white paint peeling in places. A row of ancient cedar trees lined the narrow path leading to the entrance, their branches swaying in the strong ocean breeze. I punched in the rental code I'd received by email and stepped inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the rugged exterior, beautifully renovated with modern amenities while maintaining its historical charm. The circular room at the base of the lighthouse had been converted into a cozy living space, with a small kitchen tucked into one corner. I had just settled down with some takeout food when there was a knock at the door. I hadn't heard any car approach over the constant sound of crashing waves below. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with a man who appeared to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and worn fishing boots. "Just checking to make sure you got in all right," he said with a slight smile. "Everything working okay?" There was something off about his appearance. His clothes had an unusual musty smell, like old seaweed and damp wood. I assured him everything was fine and said good night, closing the door. I assumed he must be the caretaker, though it seemed odd he hadn't introduced himself as such. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling as I finished my dinner and headed for a shower in the small bathroom beneath the spiral staircase. The shower was quick. I was exhausted from driving and wanted to review my photos before bed. I had just settled into the antique armchair with my laptop when another knock echoed through the lighthouse. Like before, I hadn't heard anyone approach. This time, the knock sent a chill down my spine. No caretaker would need to check twice within an hour, and something about that musty smell from earlier kept nagging at my mind. I didn't move, hoping he'd assume I was asleep. "Could you open the door?" His voice came through, different now, more insistent. "Just one more quick thing, I promise." I remained silent, my heart beginning to race. After a long, eerie pause, he knocked again, harder this time. "I know you're in there. Please open the door." The waves crashed against the cliff below as I waited, frozen in place. When no response came from me, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. I couldn't hear footsteps walking away. Was he still standing there? I crept toward the door and peered through the small, round window. The porch was empty, but then movement caught my eye. At one of the ground floor windows, his face appeared pressed against the glass, eyes locked with mine. I ran to the bedroom, fumbling with my phone to call 911. While I waited, I heard scratching sounds at the windows, like he was testing them, looking for a way in. The sound of him trying to force open a window sent me into panic. Why would a caretaker need to break in? That's when it hit me. He wasn't the caretaker at all. The police arrived in what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. By then, he had disappeared into the darkness. When they contacted the real owner of the lighthouse, my suspicions were confirmed. No caretaker was supposed to be there. They never found the man, but evidence suggested he had been squatting in an old storage shed near the lighthouse, watching guests come and go. The next morning, as I packed my cameras and left, the lighthouse stood peaceful against the morning sky, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't help wondering about all the other travelers who had stayed there, and whether they'd had late-night visits from the mysterious caretaker, too. During winter break, my father decided to take us to a remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies. It was just the three of us, Dad, who taught history at the local high school, my 8-year-old brother Tommy, and me. We were partly there for vacation, but Dad was also scouting the area, considering a teaching position at a small mountain town school. The cabin he'd found online was much more isolated than we expected. It sat nearly 40 minutes from the nearest town, nestled deep in a pine forest. The narrow mountain road leading to it wound through towering evergreens, their branches heavy with fresh snow. After a 12-hour drive, with Dad and me taking turns at the wheel, we finally arrived as the sun was setting. The mountains cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground, and our breath formed clouds in the crisp mountain air. The cabin itself was clearly hand-built, all rough-hewn logs and slightly crooked windows. Everything creaked when we walked, and the door needed an extra push to close properly against the winter wind. We spent the evening getting settled, with Dad showing Tommy how to build a fire in the old stone fireplace. I dozed off on the couch for a while, tired from the long drive. When I woke up, it was already dark outside, and Dad had taken Tommy to bed. Still feeling restless from my nap, I decided to check out the back porch. The wooden deck was small, with an old fire pit in the center, surrounded by a few weathered Adirondack chairs. The night was incredibly still. No traffic noise, no city sounds, just the occasional hoot of an owl and the gentle whisper of wind through the pines. The stars were amazing, more than I'd ever seen before. I noticed a stack of firewood by the cabin wall and decided to try out the fire pit. Once I got it going, the flames cast dancing shadows on the snow, and the crackling wood provided a comfortable backdrop to the mountain silence. After about 30 minutes, a sound shattered the peaceful night. It echoed through the trees, a sharp metallic thunk that reminded me of an axe splitting wood. Just one strike, then silence. It seemed close, too close for comfort given how remote we were. Who would be chopping wood in complete darkness? The sound set my nerves on edge, ruining the tranquility of the moment. I extinguished the fire and hurried back inside. Dad and Tommy were still asleep, their doors closed against the mountain cold. I wasn't tired anymore. Whether from my earlier nap or the unsettling sound, I couldn't say. I settled on the couch with my phone, starting a movie I'd downloaded earlier. About 15 minutes in, I heard something that made me pause the film and listen. At first, I thought it might just be the old cabin settling, or maybe the wind pushing against the walls. But then I heard it again, this time from the opposite side of the cabin, near one of the windows. I leaned closer, straining to hear, when suddenly a series of violent knocks thundered against the front door. The sound seemed to shake the entire cabin. Dad burst out of his room, asking what was happening. I stood frozen, telling him someone was at the door. He immediately went for his phone to call 911. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be pounding on our door in the middle of nowhere at this hour. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. In the darkness, I could make out a tall figure standing unnaturally still, staring straight ahead. The moonlight reflecting off the snow illuminated something in his hand, a woodcutter's axe, its blade gleaming dully. My heart nearly stopped. There was no innocent explanation for this, no lost hiker or stranded motorist. The man began pounding on the door again, each blow more aggressive than the last. Dad was talking to the emergency operator when we heard it, the horrible sound of metal striking wood as the axe blade splintered through the door. We ran to Tommy's room, locking ourselves inside. We could hear more strikes against the door, but only 4 or 5 before everything went quiet. We had no way of knowing if he'd gotten in or given up, so we waited in terrified silence. The first police car arrived in just under 20 minutes, remarkably fast considering our location. The front door was deeply scarred with axe marks, but it had held. There was no sign of the man, just footprints in the snow leading into the dark forest. The officer's best guess was that he'd seen my fire from somewhere in the woods, drawing him to the cabin. They never found him or got answers about why he was out there that night with an axe. We left immediately, spending the rest of our break in a hotel back in town. Needless to say, Dad decided to look for teaching positions somewhere less remote. This happened last summer, during what was supposed to be a routine drive from Miami to Wilmington. As a freelance photographer, I'd made similar trips before, but this one turned out to be anything but ordinary. I had a major beach wedding photo shoot scheduled for the next afternoon, and driving through the night seemed like a smart way to save on hotel costs. I left Miami at 7 in the evening, my trusty Honda packed with camera equipment and everything I needed for the shoot. The first couple of hours were pleasant enough, busy highways, well-lit roads, and plenty of other travelers keeping me company. But as I turned onto the coastal highway, everything changed. The roads became darker, narrower, and the traffic thinned out until I was practically alone. By midnight, my gas gauge was dipping low, and I needed a break. The coastline was beautiful but desolate, with nothing but marshlands and occasional patches of civilization. When I finally spotted a sign for Joe's Diner and Gas, I felt relieved. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1980s, all neon lights and faded paint, but at least it was open. I pulled up to the pump and started filling my tank. The gas flowed unusually slowly, almost like thick syrup. While waiting, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A dark blue pickup truck approached at a crawl, past the station, then suddenly reversed back in. Something about that deliberate reversal made my skin crawl. The driver parked at the pump behind me. In the fluorescent light, I could see him clearly. A man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, looking completely ordinary except for his eyes. They were unnaturally bright, like someone who'd had way too much coffee. He smiled and waved, then called out, "Beautiful night for a drive, isn't it?" I nodded politely, but kept my distance. He walked to the store section of the station, presumably to pay for gas, but I never heard him start pumping. When I finished filling up, I quickly got back in my car and pulled away, watching him disappear in my rearview mirror. The next few hours were a blur of dark roads and increasing fatigue. Around 3 in the morning, my eyelids felt like lead weights. I spotted a small roadside cafe with a few trucks parked outside and decided to stop for coffee. The parking lot was poorly lit, with half the bulbs burned out. I parked near the entrance, took a quick look around, and headed inside. The cafe was nearly empty, just a tired-looking waitress and a couple of truck drivers at the counter. I ordered coffee and sat in a booth where I could see my car through the window. That's when I noticed it. The same dark blue pickup from the gas station, parked in the shadows at the far end of the lot. My hands started shaking as I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I quickly paid for my untouched coffee and hurried to my car. As I backed out, I looked in my rearview mirror, and my heart nearly stopped. There he was, crouched in my backseat, those bright eyes meeting mine in the mirror. I didn't think, I just acted. I slammed on the brakes, threw open my door, and ran. Behind me, I heard my car roll backward and stop, but no footsteps following. I ran into the cafe, screaming for help. The truck drivers immediately stood up, and the waitress was already dialing something on the landline. When I looked back through the cafe windows, my car was gone. So was the blue pickup. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but by then, both vehicles had vanished into the night. They found my car 3 days later, abandoned at a marina 50 miles north. Everything was still inside, my cameras, my clothes, everything except my phone. The investigation revealed something chilling. The blue pickup had been stolen 2 weeks earlier from a family in Georgia. Its owner was found unconscious in the trunk, dehydrated but alive. The man in the polo shirt was never caught, but security footage from various gas stations showed him following other solo travelers along the coast. I was lucky. The family he stole the truck from wasn't his first victims, and they weren't as fortunate as I was. Now, whenever I have to drive long distances, I only travel during daylight hours. And I always check my backseat before getting in the car, not just once, but 3 times. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters don't look like monsters at all. They look like ordinary people with bright eyes and friendly smiles, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This happened last winter, during one of those bitter cold nights when the Atlantic shows its teeth. I've been the keeper of the old Bailey Point Lighthouse for 3 years now. It's not really a lighthouse anymore. They automated the warning signals decades ago. But the building still stands proud on its rocky peninsula, converted into a cozy home that I maintain for the Historical Society. That evening, I got an unexpected call from Mike, one of the local fishermen. His boat had engine trouble, and he needed help getting back to the harbor. This wasn't unusual. I often helped the locals with small favors, and they repaid me with fresh fish and good company. I grabbed my heavy coat and wool cap, heading for the door. The wind was howling outside, making the old wooden stairs creak beneath the carpet. When I opened the door, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. There was a man standing right there on my porch, barely 2 feet away, wearing an old-fashioned yellow rain slicker. The storm lamp I keep by the door cast strange shadows across his face. He didn't seem startled by my sudden appearance. Instead, he stood perfectly still, water dripping from his coat, despite the fact that it hadn't started raining yet. "Sorry," he said, his voice oddly hollow. "I was about to knock." Something about his accent seemed off, like he was trying too hard to sound local. Before I could respond, he asked if I was someone named James or John. I couldn't quite catch the name over the wind. When I said no, he just nodded slowly and turned away, walking down the spiral staircase that led to the ground. I watched him descend, making sure he left the property before I got in my truck. The whole drive to the harbor, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling about that encounter. Nobody just wanders up to the lighthouse, especially not on a night like this. The access road is long and clearly marked as private property. After helping Mike with his boat, and grabbing a quick dinner at the Harbor Cafe, I returned home around 9. The wind had picked up even more, and dark clouds were gathering overhead. Inside, I settled into my usual evening routine, checking the weather reports, updating the lighthouse logs, and relaxing with some TV. Around 11, the first drops of rain began hitting the windows. That's when I remembered the strange visitor from earlier. Something made me walk to the door and check the peephole. The porch was empty, but as I was about to turn away, I noticed something in the beam of the outdoor light. Footprints, wet footprints on the wooden deck, leading from the stairs to my door. They hadn't been there when I came home. As I stared at them, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and I saw more prints leading off toward the side of the building, where the old keeper's storage room was located. My blood ran cold. I started checking all the windows and doors, and that's when I heard it, a slow, methodical thumping coming from the back of the lighthouse. It wasn't the wind. It was too regular, too deliberate. I called the police, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. While I was on the phone, there was a tremendous crash from the storage room. Through the window, I could see the door had been smashed open, and there he was, the same figure in the yellow rain slicker. But now, he held something long and metallic in his hands. I ran for my truck, the operator still on the line. As I peeled out of the driveway, I could see him in my rearview mirror, standing in the beacon light at the top of the lighthouse, his slicker glowing an eerie yellow. The police found the storage room door smashed and wet footprints throughout the lighthouse, but the intruder was gone. They discovered that 3 other lighthouse keepers' residences along the coast had been broken into over the past month. Each time, the intruder wore the same yellow rain slicker, but no one had gotten as clear a look at him as I had. They never caught him. Sometimes on stormy nights, I still check the porch for wet footprints, and when the wind hits the lighthouse just right, making a thumping sound against the walls, I wonder if he's out there, moving up and down the coast, looking for something or someone in the remaining lighthouses. The Historical Society offered to install a modern security system, but I declined. Instead, I had them reinforce all the doors and windows, because something tells me that whatever he was looking for wasn't something that could be stopped by alarms and cameras. Some mysteries of the sea are better left unsolved. It was fall of 2019 when I started giving piano lessons to little Isabella at the Morrison estate. I was fresh out of music college, and this job paid well enough to help with my student loans. The house was an impressive Victorian mansion, complete with a grand Steinway piano that was probably worth more than everything I owned. Every Thursday evening, I would arrive at 8, just as Isabella was getting ready for bed. Her parents, both successful art dealers, would leave for their weekly gallery event in the city, trusting me to watch over their daughter while she slept. The arrangement seemed perfect. I could practice my own pieces on that magnificent piano while keeping an ear out for any disturbances. That night started like any other. I pulled up to the wrought iron gates at exactly 8, punched in the security code, and drove up the winding driveway lined with maple trees shedding their autumn leaves. Mrs. Morrison greeted me at the door, explaining that Isabella had already fallen asleep after her evening practice session. She's been working so hard on that choppin' piece, Mrs. Morrison said, gathering her coat. Sometimes I hear her practicing in her dreams. She smiled, but something about her expression seemed strained. Before leaving, she mentioned that they'd switched to a new security company, and the house alarm might be a bit sensitive. Barely an hour into my usual routine of quiet practice and reading, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Morrison asking if I tried to call her from an unknown number. I hadn't. She seemed unsettled, but brushed it off, saying the gallery reception must be affecting her cell service. Around 10, I was reviewing some sheet music when movement caught my eye through the living room window. A dark sedan had parked across the street, its headlights cutting through the evening fog. A figure stood beside it, barely visible in the mist. Something about their posture seemed familiar, like a conductor poised before an orchestra. I drew the heavy curtains and tried to focus on my music, but the keys felt wrong under my fingers, like they were slightly out of tune. That's when I heard it, the faintest melody drifting down from upstairs, from Isabella's room. It was the Chopin piece she'd been practicing, but something was off about the rhythm. My heart pounding, I crept up the main staircase. The music grew clearer with each step, but it couldn't be coming from Isabella's room. It was too complex for a 7-year-old, too professional. I reached her door and slowly pushed it open. The bedroom was empty. The bed was still made, the sheets undisturbed. Isabella was gone. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to find a man standing at the end of the hallway, his silhouette backlit by the stained glass window. He wore a conductor's suit, complete with tails, and held what looked like a baton in his right hand. I ran down the stairs through the living room, fumbling with my phone as I went. Behind me, the piano began to play a frenzied, discordant version of the same Chopin piece. I grabbed my keys and burst out the front door, only to find the dark sedan now parked in the driveway, blocking my car. The next few moments were a blur. I ran down the long driveway on foot, the sound of piano music following me into the night. When the police arrived, they found Isabella safe and sound at her neighbor's house. She'd apparently sleepwalked there earlier in the evening, something she'd never done before. The man in the conductor's suit was never found, but the investigation revealed a disturbing detail. 10 years ago, a famous pianist had died in that house, Mrs. Morrison's first husband. He'd been found at his piano, still in his concert attire, after a particularly challenging performance of the same Chopin piece. The Morrisons moved away shortly after that night. I still teach piano, but only in my own studio now. Sometimes, when I'm alone practicing late at night, I'll catch myself listening for footsteps behind me, or watching for a conductor's silhouette in my window. And I never, ever play Chopin after dark. It was a particularly nasty autumn evening when I finally got home from my shift at the software company. The clock had just struck 8, and all I wanted was to immerse myself in some online gaming with my friends. After my divorce 3 months ago, these evening gaming sessions had become my escape, my way of maintaining some semblance of normalcy in my otherwise empty house in suburban Portland. The weather forecast had warned about an incoming storm, with potential flash flood warnings. Living in the Pacific Northwest, I was used to such warnings. They came as regularly as coffee shops in downtown Portland. Still, something felt different about tonight. Around 11, while I was deep in a game session with my online friends, a violent gust of wind slammed against my office window with such force that the whole house seemed to shudder. Taking my headset partially off, I could hear the rain hammering against the roof like thousands of tiny drumsticks. The house groaned and swayed under the assault of the wind, its old wooden frame protesting against nature's fury. I turned back to my screen to update my friends about the situation. But before I could finish my sentence, everything flickered, my screen, the lights, everything, then snapped back on for a brief moment before plunging into complete darkness. The sudden silence was deafening. I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. Fumbling around my desk, I found my phone and switched on its flashlight. Frustrated, I made my way downstairs to check the situation through the front window. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it nearly impossible to tell if the neighboring houses had power or not. I quickly sent a message to my gaming group explaining my situation, then headed to the basement to retrieve my old power bank. The basement steps creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. Just as I grabbed the power bank, I heard something, a subtle sound behind me near the storage boxes. I told myself it was just the storm making the house settle, but my heart started beating a little faster. Back upstairs, I plugged a lamp into the power bank and settled on the couch. I've always had this weird quirk. I can't sleep during power outages until the electricity comes back on. So I sat there, scrolling through YouTube on my phone, trying to distract myself from the storm raging outside. After about an hour, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped onto my covered porch to check if other houses had power. Surprisingly, I could see lights on in several windows across the street. Confused, I checked for outage reports on my phone, but found nothing conclusive. That's when I received a text from an unknown number, claiming to be from the power company, warning about downed power lines. Something felt off about it. The number wasn't official, and the message lacked the usual utility company ID. Back inside, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a footstep on one of the creaky basement stairs. Having lived here for years, I knew that sound intimately. Moving slowly and quietly, phone light barely illuminating the way, I approached the hallway. The basement door was wide open, definitely not how I'd left it. My heart pounding, I aimed the light down the stairs, but couldn't bring myself to investigate further. I closed the door, and before I could process what was happening, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Pure instinct took over. I slammed my body against the door, just as someone on the other side tried to force it open. They started ramming against it, each impact shaking the door in its frame. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The moment I started dialing, the attack stopped, and I heard footsteps retreating down the stairs. I took this chance to run to my car. From across the street, I watched my house for 10 minutes, but saw no movement. When the police arrived, they found no one. The intruder had escaped through the back door. The most disturbing part, the police confirmed that the power outage text was fake, sent from a personal number. This wasn't random. Whoever broke in knew enough about me to get my phone number. They had targeted me specifically, cutting my power and sending that text when they saw me checking the neighbors' houses, probably to keep me from investigating the breaker box in the basement. The case remains unsolved. No one knows who it was or what they wanted, but I've since installed a security system, and I never go down to the basement alone anymore, especially during storms. Me and my best friend Thomas had done some camping before, but we were still what you'd call novices. Our previous trips had always been to populated campgrounds, surrounded by other campers and modern amenities. This time, though, we wanted something different, something more authentic. After some research, we found a promising spot in Olympic National Park, about 3 hours from Seattle. It required a 4-hour hike into the wilderness, and the few photos we found online showed a stunning viewpoint overlooking dense forest. The lack of recent pictures suggested it wasn't frequently visited perfect for what we were looking for. We parked our car in a small dirt clearing at the end of an abandoned logging road. The trail ahead looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years, with parts of it overgrown and weathered by the elements. Still, we could make out enough of a path to follow, so we started our journey into the forest. The trail gradually narrowed as we ventured deeper, but by mid-afternoon, we reached our destination, a grassy clearing atop a small hill, offering a breathtaking view of the surrounding wilderness. The site showed signs of neglect, but that only added to its charm. We were completely alone, exactly as we'd hoped. While Thomas set up our tents, I walked to the edge of the overlook to take in the view. That's when I saw something moving in the dense forest below, a group of people, maybe 4 or 5 of them, walking between the trees. It was strange seeing anyone else out here, especially not using the main trail. By the time Thomas joined me, they disappeared into the thick foliage. The day passed peacefully enough, but as night fell and we sat around our campfire, we heard them, voices carrying through the darkness. Multiple people talking, their words indistinct, but clearly not far away. We couldn't make out what they were saying, or even what language they were speaking. The voices remained stationary, hidden somewhere in the surrounding forest, until they suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was unnerving. Then we heard footsteps, just one set approaching our camp. A man emerged from the darkness into our firelight, wearing a distinctive blue baseball cap and long, wavy dark hair. He smiled broadly as he approached us. "Either of you know where the trail is?" "Been wandering for a while," he asked. I pointed him in the right direction, then asked if the others we'd heard were with him. His smile faltered for a moment before returning. "Others? Haven't seen anyone else out here. Been hiking solo," he replied, though he'd come from exactly where we'd heard the voices. After he left, Thomas and I discussed the strange encounter. Why would he lie about the others? The whole time, it felt like we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the dark forest and the trail, an unsettling feeling growing stronger by the minute. Finally, Thomas suggested we leave. Just as we finished packing and extinguished our fire, we heard a single footstep in the leaves behind us. The woods had gone eerily quiet. With shaking hands, I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. There he was, the same man with the blue cap, standing just 15 feet away, staring at us with that same unnaturally wide smile. In panic, I switched off the light, and we ran for the trail. Behind us, multiple sets of footsteps gave chase, some crashing through the forest beside us, gradually fading as we sprinted through the darkness. We made it back to our car unharmed, but thoroughly shaken. To this day, we don't know who those people were or what they wanted. Neither of us has been camping since, and honestly, I don't know if we ever will again. It was spring of 2023 when everything happened. I was 24, studying medicine at an out-of state university, and finally heading home to visit my family during our early spring break. The journey would take 2 days by car, mostly through long stretches of empty Montana roads, but I preferred driving to flying any day. I left early Tuesday morning, making good time as I drove through the increasingly remote landscape. After nearly 10 hours of driving, stopping only for food and gas, I decided to call it a day around 8 p.m. At a small gas station, I pulled up my phone to search for the nearest hotel. The directions led me down an old road behind the gas station, away from the highway. The street was barely lit, with ancient lampposts casting weak pools of light at irregular intervals. After about 5 minutes of driving through what looked like a town frozen in time, I found the hotel, a small, weathered building that had clearly seen better days. The empty parking lot didn't surprise me given the location. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, almost uncomfortably so, and eerily quiet. No ambient noise, no TV, no other guests, just silence. After a minute, a woman appeared from a back hallway, starting slightly when she saw me. She quickly checked me in, giving me a room at the far end of the corridor. The room was small and dated, but I was too tired to care. I collapsed on the small sofa, scrolling through my phone until I dozed off. A loud banging on my door jolted me awake. The clock on the wall read 11 p.m. Confused and slightly concerned, I opened the door to find an empty hallway. I waited, listening for any movement, but the hotel remained silent. After a shower, I set my alarm for 8 a.m. and went to bed, hoping for a good night's sleep before another long day of driving. But again, I was awakened by loud banging on my door. This time when I opened it, the hallway was dark except for the thin strip of light beneath my door, and empty once again. Frustrated, I walked to the front desk to report the disturbance. The woman looked confused when I mentioned it, then informed me that I was the only guest in the hotel that night. I returned to my room, making sure all the locks were secure before lying back in bed, reaching for my phone to help me relax. Its screen illuminated something that made my blood run cold, a figure standing motionless in the corner of my room, watching me. I jumped up and backed toward the door, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. As I frantically worked the locks, I heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. I ran down the hallway, the footsteps getting closer. The front desk woman's eyes widened in terror as she looked past me at my pursuer. She reached for the phone to call 911, but the man suddenly changed direction and sprinted out the front door, disappearing into the night. The police investigation revealed little. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside. The only thing we learned was that the man had slipped into my room while I was at the front desk asking about the knocking. His identity and motives remain unknown. I left that night, unwilling to stay a minute longer. To this day, it remains the most terrifying experience of my life. And I always check every corner of my hotel rooms now, no matter how safe they seem. This happened just about 3 years ago in our small mountain town. I had recently started my urban exploration blog, documenting forgotten places and telling their stories through my photos. The old Mountain Grove Sanatorium had always caught my eye, a massive stone building from the 1920s, standing alone on the edge of town like a sleeping giant. I had heard stories about it since childhood. The sanatorium closed down in the 1980s after a series of mysterious deaths, and no one wanted to buy the property. Time and nature slowly reclaimed it, with ivy crawling up its walls and trees growing through broken windows. That autumn afternoon, I decided to check it out. The weather was perfect, overcast, but dry, giving the whole scene an eerie atmosphere that would look great in photos. I packed my camera, a powerful flashlight, and some extra batteries. Usually, I explore with my friend Mark, but he was out of town, and I didn't want to miss the perfect lighting conditions. The long driveway leading to the sanatorium was barely visible, covered in decades of fallen leaves. As I walked deeper into the property, the trees grew denser, their branches creating twisted shadows on the ground. The building looked even more impressive up close, 3 stories of weathered stone, with elegant but decaying architecture. I found a broken window on the ground floor and carefully climbed through, making sure to document everything with my camera. The air inside was heavy, with the smell of mold and decay. What struck me most was how much stuff had been left behind: old metal bed frames, wheelchair parts, and even personal belongings of former patients scattered across the floors. The first floor contained what looked like administrative offices. Patient files were still there, their pages yellow and brittle, telling stories of long-forgotten lives. I spent about 20 minutes photographing everything, then headed up to the second floor. The wooden stairs protested under my weight, each step creating an echoing creak throughout the building. The second floor was different. It had been the patient ward. Long corridors stretched in both directions, with rows of doors leading to small rooms. Some doors were open, others closed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of wind whistling through broken windows. I was photographing an old medicine cabinet when I heard it, a distinct thump from somewhere below, like something heavy being knocked over. My heart started racing immediately. It wasn't the sound of the building settling. It was too deliberate, too solid. I switched off my flashlight and stood completely still, listening. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, moving across the floor below. I knew I should leave, but the only way out was down those same stairs. As I stood there trying to decide what to do, something even more terrifying happened. The door that I had left open when I came upstairs slowly closed with a soft click. My throat went dry. Someone was in the building with me, and they were trying to trap me up here. I moved quickly but quietly to the window at the end of the corridor. Through the dirty glass, I could see a metal fire escape. Just as I was about to break the window lock, I heard voices, but not from below. They were coming from outside. Red and blue lights were flashing at the entrance to the property. 2 police cars were making their way up the overgrown driveway, their tires crushing the dead leaves. They weren't using sirens, but they were moving with purpose. I hid behind a large cabinet and waited, my heart pounding. The police officers entered the building, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They moved with their hands on their weapons, calling out commands to someone. I heard rapid footsteps below, then a struggle, and finally the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Later, after I'd snuck out through a side exit and made my way home, I tried to find information about what happened that day. The local news never reported anything, but rumors spread through town about escaped patients from a nearby mental health facility being found hiding in abandoned buildings. I still do urban exploration, but now I always bring a partner, and I never returned to Mountain Grove Sanatorium. Some places are better left alone with their secrets. It was late October 2021 when this happened. I lived with my college friends, Thomas and Ryan, in a small apartment while we finished our senior year. Between classes and part-time jobs, we rarely had free time together, but when we did, we loved exploring interesting places around our town. That autumn, several local news outlets had reported mysterious disappearances near the old cotton mill district. The police found nothing concrete, and the cases remained open. Despite this, or maybe because of it, the abandoned textile mill became a subject of urban legends. One Friday evening, when we all happened to be free, Thomas mentioned the old mill. His sister worked at the local history museum and told him about its past, how it had been the town's largest employer until a devastating fire in 1998 forced it to close. The building had stood empty ever since, slowly decaying on the outskirts of town. We drove there in Ryan's pickup truck, parking behind an old diner about a quarter-mile away. The sky was already dark, with heavy clouds hiding the moon. The mill district was completely deserted. No street lights, no cars, not even stray cats. Just empty loading docks and broken windows staring at us like hollow eyes. The mill itself was massive, 4 stories of red brick and rusted metal, with a tall smokestack rising into the darkness. Getting inside was easier than we expected. Previous visitors had cut through the chain-link fence, and the heavy metal door was already partially open. As soon as we stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop. The whole building creaked and moaned in the wind, metal beams shifting overhead. Our flashlights revealed a forest of ancient machinery, huge looms, spinning frames, and carding machines, all covered in decades of dust and rust. The air smelled of oil and decay. I wandered toward the back of the main floor, keeping Thomas's light in sight behind me. The beam of my flashlight danced across broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. At the far end, I found a metal staircase leading both up and down. Looking back, I saw one of my friends examining an old control panel, though in the darkness, I couldn't tell which one. Through the door at the bottom of the stairs, I discovered what must have been the storage area. Massive wooden spools were scattered across the floor, and overhead, a system of conveyor belts hung like skeletal ribs. The sound of my footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space. Then I heard it, the door I'd just come through squealing on its hinges. Thinking my friends had followed me, I called out their names. No response, just the hollow echo of my voice bouncing off concrete walls. I turned around, shining my light toward the door, but no one was there. "Thomas, Ryan," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, not from the direction of my friends, but from deeper in the darkness. And not just one set. There were at least two people moving in the shadows. Before I could process what was happening, a rough voice called out, "Someone's down here." I caught a glimpse of two figures moving between the support columns, large men wearing dark clothes, carrying something that gleamed dully in my flashlight beam. I ran, back up the stairs, heart pounding, taking the steps two at a time. I could hear them pursuing, their heavy boots clanging on the metal steps. Bursting into the main room, I shouted for my friends. They were already heading toward the exit, having heard the commotion. We sprinted through the parking lot and didn't stop until we reached Ryan's truck. Only when we were safely driving away did we process what had happened. Those men weren't security guards or homeless people. They were too organized, too purposeful. We later learned that police found evidence of criminal activity in the mill's basement, though they never released the details to the public. That night changed how we looked at abandoned places. Sometimes empty buildings aren't really empty, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. This happened during winter break 5 years ago. I was in high school then, and my best friend Matthew and I were always looking for new adventures. We lived in a small town where everyone knew about the abandoned observatory on top of Miller's Hill, but few people ever ventured there. The observatory had been built in the 1950s, back when our town was hoping to become a center for astronomical research. But funding dried up in the 70s, and the facility was left to decay. From the town below, you could still see its distinctive dome silhouetted against the sky, like a forgotten sentinel watching over the valley. That December evening, Matthew and I were hanging out at his place, playing video games and trying to fight off the boredom of winter break. Through his window, we could see the observatory's dome catching the last rays of the setting sun. We talked about exploring it before, but something had always held us back. Maybe it was the local stories about strange lights seen there at night, or the unexplained sounds people claimed to hear coming from the hill. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and a full moon was rising, casting everything in a silvery glow. Perfect conditions for an adventure, we thought. We bundled up in warm clothes, grabbed our phones for flashlights, and headed toward Miller's Hill. The access road had long since crumbled away, forcing us to climb the steep hill on foot. Dead leaves crunched under our boots, and our breath formed clouds in the freezing air. The closer we got to the observatory, the more imposing it became. The main building was larger than it looked from town, a 2-story concrete structure with the massive dome on top. Getting inside was surprisingly easy. The front door was unlocked, its lock mechanisms long since rusted away. As we pushed it open, the hinges protested with a sound that echoed through the empty building. The entrance hall was lined with faded educational posters about constellations and planetary alignments. The moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating strange patterns on the dusty floor. Our flashlight beams revealed old office furniture, scattered papers, and complex equipment left to rust. But what caught our attention was the spiral staircase leading up to the dome. We climbed carefully, each step producing a metallic ring that reverberated through the building. The dome room was incredible, a vast circular space dominated by what remained of the telescope mount. The dome itself had several gaps where panels had fallen away, letting in streams of moonlight. That's when we heard it, a deep, resonating thud from somewhere below. Both of us froze. The sound was followed by another, then another, like rhythmic footsteps moving through the building. Matthew's flashlight beam danced nervously around the room as we listened. Suddenly, something moved in the shadows near the old telescope mount. A figure stepped into a beam of moonlight, tall and unnaturally thin, its movements jerky and wrong. Before we could react, it disappeared back into the darkness with an inhuman grace. We heard more movement, this time from the staircase. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by a strange, low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the metal floor. Without speaking, we both knew we had to get out. We ran for the emergency exit. We'd noticed earlier a metal door leading to an exterior staircase. As we burst through it, the humming grew louder, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. We took the stairs 3 at a time, the metal rattling beneath our feet. We didn't stop running until we reached the bottom of the hill. Looking back, we saw something that still haunts me, lights moving behind the dome's broken panels, but not flashlights or electric lights. They were more like the aurora borealis, shifting and dancing in impossible colors. The next day, we tried to convince ourselves that we'd imagined it all, the figure, the humming, the lights. But a week later, the local paper ran a small article about unusual atmospheric phenomena observed over Miller's Hill. The observatory was demolished the following spring, officially due to safety concerns. Matthew and I never talked much about what happened that night, but sometimes when we look up at the hill where the observatory once stood, we remember the strange lights and that impossibly tall figure moving in the moonlight. Some questions, we learned, are better left unanswered. I never thought house sitting could turn into such a nightmare, especially at Olivia Morgan's beautiful lakeside home. The house had been in her family for generations, and I'd always loved visiting the antique furniture, the creaking wooden floors, and those huge windows overlooking Lake Michigan. When Olivia asked me to watch her place while she attended her sister's wedding in Seattle, I jumped at the chance. The weather forecast predicted a massive storm system moving in, and Olivia was particularly worried about Luna, her elderly German shepherd. The poor thing had developed severe anxiety during thunderstorms in her old age. "Just keep her company, Emily," Olivia had said. "She might act strange when it storms, but she'll be fine as long as someone's there." The first day was peaceful. I spent my morning reading in the sunroom, watching dark clouds gather over the lake. Luna lounged nearby, occasionally lifting her head to watch boats hurrying back to the harbor before the storm hit. The house felt different when I was alone, bigger somehow, with all those empty rooms behind me. The storm broke around noon, rain hammering against the windows. That's when the first call came. The landline rang. Olivia kept it for emergencies, since cell service could be spotty during bad weather. The caller ID showed unknown number. I let it ring, but moments later, the answering machine clicked on. A man's voice, barely above a whisper, spoke just one word: Olivia. The way he said her name made my skin crawl. Over the next few hours, 3 more calls came from the same unknown number. Each time, silence on the answering machine. I tried texting Olivia, but got no response. She was probably busy with wedding preparations. I told myself it was nothing, just some wrong numbers or maybe technical glitches from the storm. As evening approached, the storm intensified. The lake was a churning mass of white-capped waves, visible in brilliant flashes of lightning. I was upstairs in the master bedroom, trying to distract myself with a movie, when I realized I hadn't checked on Luna in a while. I found her in the grand entrance hall, standing completely still, staring at the ornate front door. Her ears were forward, tail stiff. "Luna," I called softly. She glanced at me, but immediately returned her attention to the door. Something about her posture sent chills down my spine. I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding as I leaned toward the peephole. The porch light was on, but the rain made everything distorted and blurry. Then something moved, a dark shape, shifting in the background. Someone was out there, partially hidden behind one of the thick wooden pillars that lined the porch. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. If someone was really there, they would knock right. I hurried to check Luna's food and water bowls in the kitchen, desperate for a mundane task to settle my nerves. When I returned to the hall, Luna had moved to the bottom of the grand staircase, her attention now fixed on the second floor. Back upstairs, I had just settled into bed when Luna, who had followed me, suddenly stood alert. Her eyes were locked on the bedroom door, and a low growl rumbled in her throat, something I'd never heard from her before. I listened intently, and that's when I heard its soft footsteps in the hallway approaching the door. My phone was in my hand before I could think, finger hovering over the emergency call button. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I never locked the bedroom door. As I watched in horror, the handle began to turn. Luna's growl grew louder as I lunged for the lock, engaging it just as the door started to open. There was a moment of stillness, then the sound of running footsteps down the hall. I called 911 with trembling fingers, then Olivia. The police arrived within 20 minutes, but the intruder was gone. They found signs of forced entry through the cellar door, hidden from the street view. Later investigation revealed a disturbing truth. Someone had been stalking Olivia for months. They'd been watching the house, learning her routines, and chose this stormy weekend to break in, probably thinking the house would be empty. The police never caught him. The phone calls were traced to disposable phones, and despite increased patrols, the stalker seemed to vanish. Olivia installed a state-of-the-art security system after that, but she tells me Luna is still their best warning system. To this day, that old dog keeps a watchful eye on the doors, especially during storms. Getting laid off from my first developer job hit hard. 3 years of coding experience, and suddenly I was back to scrolling through job boards. At least I had some savings to keep me afloat while hunting for a new position. The tech industry was going through a rough patch, with startups shutting down left and right, but I tried to stay optimistic. 2 weeks into my job search, I had already applied to 50 positions with 0 responses. The silence was deafening. I started exploring less conventional job sites, diving deeper into tech forums and specialized boards. That's where I stumbled upon a posting that caught my eye, a senior developer position at a promising AI startup, offering remote work and an impressive salary package. The response came almost immediately. A message from someone named Marcus, the supposed CTO, expressing interest in my profile. The email seemed professional enough, though something felt slightly off about the formatting. He mentioned being on a tight schedule and asked if I could do a video interview that same evening at 9:30. While unusual, I figured tech companies often moved fast, and I didn't want to miss an opportunity. Marcus sent over an address for a co-working space where they supposedly had an office. He explained they were in the process of moving to a larger location, which explained why I couldn't find much about their physical presence online. I should have seen the red flags, but desperation has a way of clouding judgment. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking in front of a modern-looking building in the business district. The lights were off except for a dim glow from what appeared to be emergency exits. The parking lot was empty, and the main entrance was locked. I double-checked the address. It matched perfectly. I tried calling the number from the email multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail. After waiting 30 minutes, my instincts finally kicked in. This wasn't right. The whole setup felt increasingly suspicious. I decided to leave, making a mental note to stick with well-known job platforms from now on. On the drive home, I tried to shake off the creepy feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something sinister. Back at my apartment, I cracked open a beer and settled in for some late-night coding practice. The familiar rhythm of typing helped calm my nerves. Around midnight, I started hearing odd noises from upstairs, subtle creaks that seemed to follow a pattern. I checked my home security app, but all sensors showed green. Still, something felt wrong. I woke with a start, not realizing I'd dozed off on the couch. The room was pitch black, save for the blinking lights of my router. That's when I noticed my laptop was missing from the coffee table where I'd left it. Fully alert now, I heard those same creaks from above, this time followed by the distinct sound of someone typing. My heart racing, I reached for my phone, only to find it wasn't in my pocket. The typing stopped. Footsteps crossed the floor above. I moved silently toward the stairs, my mind racing through possible escape routes. The staircase creaked. Someone was coming down. I bolted for the front door, but froze when I heard a voice behind me. Password incorrect. Try again. It was my own computer's voice assistant, but the tone was wrong. Someone had activated it remotely. I spun around to see a figure at the bottom of the stairs, illuminated only by the glow of my laptop screen. The face behind it was obscured, but I could make out long, unkempt hair and what looked like thick-rimmed glasses. I ran out the door across the lawn, calling 911 as I went. Police arrived within minutes, surrounding my house. They found him still upstairs, so focused on my laptop, he didn't even try to escape. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. He'd created hundreds of fake job postings across various tech platforms, specifically targeting developers and IT professionals. The fake interviews were his way of confirming when people would be away from home. He'd use that time to break in and set up sophisticated monitoring software, spending days or weeks watching his victims through their own devices before making his final move. They found a USB drive on him, containing data stolen from dozens of victims' passwords, financial information, personal photos, everything. But what he ultimately planned to do with all that information, he never revealed. The only thing he said during questioning was that he'd selected me because my coding style showed promise. I still get chills thinking about how long he might have been watching my work before making his move. Working at the Highland Peak Weather Station means embracing solitude. Perched atop one of the most remote mountains in Idaho, the station is accessible only by a single winding road that seems to disappear into the clouds. After 20 years of studying atmospheric patterns in bustling research centers, I chose this isolation. Just me, my instruments, an endless sky stretching in every direction. The autumn storms had been relentless that year, with rain falling steadily for nearly 2 weeks. I was in the middle of my usual noon weather readings when I first heard it. The distinct sound of a motorcycle engine echoing off the mountain walls. Through the rain-streaked windows of my observation tower, I spotted a figure winding up the access road on what looked like a high-end dual-sport motorcycle, the kind built for both highway and off-road use. The sight was unusual enough to draw me outside onto the covered platform. Nobody comes up here without authorization, especially not during storm season. The rider was wearing full protective gear and a black helmet with a mirrored visor, making it impossible to see their face. They stopped near my weather equipment, just sitting there, staring up at me through that reflective shield. After what felt like minutes, they slowly turned the bike around and disappeared back into the fog. I radioed down to the ranger station about the incident. They confirmed no maintenance visits were scheduled and no permits had been issued for the access road. Something about the encounter left me unsettled, but I tried to focus on my work. The barometer readings were showing a severe pressure drop. Another big storm was rolling in. The day continued normally enough. I had my regular video call with the National Weather Service, took my evening measurements, and settled in with a cup of coffee to monitor the approaching storm system. The wind was picking up considerably, driving sheets of rain against the reinforced windows. Thunder echoed through the valleys below. Around 8 in the evening, I heard it again, that same engine sound, somehow cutting through the storm. I killed the lights in the observation room and moved to the windows. A single headlight emerged from the fog, but this time, the rider cut the light before reaching the station. The motorcycle's engine went quiet, but I knew they were out there somewhere in the darkness. I reached for my satellite phone, but before I could dial, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A flash of lightning illuminated a figure standing by my primary weather station. They were examining the equipment, running their gloved hands over the sensors. I grabbed my flashlight and emergency radio, then made my way down to the ground level. The wind nearly knocked me over as I stepped outside, rain stinging my face. Another lightning flash revealed the motorcycle lying on its side in the grass, partially hidden behind some equipment crates, but no sign of the rider. Then I heard footsteps on the metal walkway that circled the building, heavy boots moving with deliberate slowness. I swept my flashlight beam around the station, but saw nothing. The footsteps continued, always just out of sight. My hand shook as I keyed the radio, trying to contact the ranger station, but only static answered. The storm was interfering with the signal. A crash of thunder made me jump, and in that moment, I caught a glimpse of something that turned my blood to ice. The rider was crouched by the back door, working at the lock with what looked like a pry bar. I raced to my truck, fumbling with the keys as I glanced over my shoulder. The figure sprinted from the door, their black gear making them nearly invisible in the darkness. I got the engine started and threw the truck into reverse, swinging around to face the access road. In my headlights, I saw the rider scrambling to right their fallen motorcycle. I didn't wait to see more. I drove down the mountain at dangerous speeds, fighting to keep control on the rain-slicked road. It wasn't until I reached the ranger station that I allowed myself to breathe normally again. The rangers immediately dispatched a team, but the storm had washed away any evidence. The only proof of the encounter was the damaged lock on the station's back door. An investigation revealed that several other remote weather stations had reported similar incidents. A mysterious rider appearing during storms, examining equipment, attempting to break in. They never took anything, never left any clues. Some theorized it was industrial espionage, someone trying to steal meteorological data. Others suggested a troubled storm chaser who had become obsessed with weather stations. But no one ever caught them, and to this day, they remain a ghost story told among weather station operators, the Phantom Rider, who appears with the storms and vanishes into the rain. It was one of those bitter winter nights when the world outside seemed frozen in time. Heavy snow had been falling relentlessly since morning, transforming my Victorian house into an isolated island in a sea of white. As a writer, I found this enforced solitude perfect for working on my latest novel. My name is Michael Thornton, and I've always believed that old houses have stories to tell. Little did I know that mine was about to tell one of its own. I spent most of that afternoon in my study, typing away at my laptop, surrounded by the comforting crackle of the antique fireplace. The snow outside muffled all sound, creating an almost supernatural silence that was broken only by the occasional creaking of the house's ancient timber frame. Around 5 in the evening, the snowfall intensified, and the wind picked up, howling through the century-old chimney like a mournful spirit. After making myself a hot cup of Earl Grey, I decided to delve into some Victorian ghost stories for inspiration. The atmosphere was perfect, the dancing shadows cast by the fireplace, the wind's eerie symphony, and the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway. 2 hours passed like this, and I found myself completely immersed in tales of spectral encounters and mysterious happenings. It was around 10 when I first noticed something odd. I had gotten up to add another log to the dying fire, when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a movement in the doorway. It wasn't just a shadow cast by the flickering flames. This was different, more solid, more purposeful. It was as if someone had quickly stepped back into the darkness of the hallway. I stood frozen, the log still in my hand, my heart suddenly racing. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses play tricks on the mind, especially during storms. The Victorian ghost stories probably hadn't helped either. But then I saw it again, this time a distinct silhouette moving across the wall of the sitting room. It was too quick, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. The grandfather clock struck 11, each chime seeming to echo through the empty house. I decided it was time for bed, though sleep was the last thing on my mind. The upper floor of the house felt different, somehow colder, more hostile. I took a hot shower, trying to wash away the growing sense of unease. I was only 5 minutes into my shower when I heard it, a thunderous crash from somewhere above, so violent it seemed to shake the entire house. The sound reverberated through the old pipes, making them rattle and groan. I quickly shut off the water, threw on my robe, and stood perfectly still, listening. The house had fallen into an unnatural silence, broken only by the soft patter of water dripping from my shower. With trembling hands, I made my way into the hallway. The air felt different, colder, and thick with an almost palpable tension. As I approached the attic stairs, a blast of frigid air hit my face. At the top of the stairs, I found the source. The attic window had been shattered inward, letting in a swirling vortex of snow and wind. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the broken window. It was the single set of footprints in the snow on the attic floor, leading from the window to the stairs where I stood. I backed away slowly, then ran to my bedroom, locking the door and calling the police. When they arrived 15 minutes later, they found more footprints, not just in the attic, but throughout the house, in the dust and carpet. Someone had been living in my attic, watching me, perhaps for days or even weeks. They found a makeshift bed hidden behind some old trunks, along with food wrappers and empty water bottles. The intruder was never caught, but I couldn't shake the thought that they had been there all along, moving in the shadows of my house, watching my every move. I sold the house 3 months later, but even now, years after, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I've seen a shadow move across my wall. Last December brought the heaviest snowfall our small town had seen in years. As an artist, I found the pristine white landscape inspiring, and I was grateful that my work allowed me to stay home during such weather. I'm Emily Rose, and my 2-story cottage on the outskirts of town had become both my home and studio since my last gallery showing 6 months ago. My studio occupied what was once a sunroom, with large windows that usually provided perfect natural light for painting. During this particular week, those windows showed nothing but endless sheets of white as snow continued to fall. I spent most of my days working on a new series of winter landscapes, my easel positioned near the window, occasionally glancing up to watch the hypnotic dance of snowflakes. One evening, after finishing a particularly challenging piece, I ventured outside to bring in the trash bins. The sun had set hours ago, and the wind whipped snow around me in swirling eddies. As I trudged back toward my front door, something caught my eye, an irregularity in the otherwise perfect blanket of snow along the side of my house. Moving closer, my breath caught in my throat. There, clearly visible despite the falling snow, was a line of footprints. They weren't random tracks. They led deliberately along the side of my house, right up to my studio window. At the window itself, the snow was heavily disturbed, as if someone had stood there for a long time, watching. The realization hit me hard. While I had been lost in my painting, someone had been standing there, observing me through the glass. Though my curtains had been drawn, they were sheer enough that someone could have seen my silhouette, watched my every move. The thought made my skin crawl. Back inside, I double-checked every lock, but sleep proved elusive that night. I kept thinking about those footprints, about the unknown observer who had stood in the freezing cold to watch me work. When morning came, I immediately checked the window. Fresh snow had fallen, erasing the previous night's tracks, and I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Almost. That day I tried to focus on my painting, but I found myself constantly glancing at the window, searching for shadows or movement. By evening, my nerves were frayed, but there had been no sign of my mysterious visitor. As darkness fell, I finally began to relax, thinking perhaps it had been a one-time occurrence. I was wrong. The next morning, the footprints were back. The same path along the house, the same disturbed area under my studio window. But this time, something was different. When I examined the window more closely, my heart nearly stopped. The lock was undone. I distinctly remembered securing it the night before, had checked it multiple times. Hands trembling, I touched the latch. The window swung open easily. In a panic, I retreated to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I huddled in my car in the driveway, watching my house with growing dread. The police arrived quickly, and as they approached the front door, a figure suddenly burst from my studio. The officers gave chase through the deep snow, eventually tackling the intruder. A man I recognized as Robert Kane, a former security guard from the gallery where I'd had my last showing. During questioning, they found dozens of sketches of me in his possession, all drawn from the perspective of my studio window. He had been watching me for months, first at the gallery, then at my home, becoming increasingly obsessed. The police discovered he had been entering my studio at night, standing in the very space where I painted during the day, touching my brushes, my canvases, my chair. I sold most of my art supplies after that, and converted the spare bedroom upstairs into a new studio. One with small, high windows that no one could see through. But sometimes, when I'm painting late at night, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow watching me from the doorway. The mountain roads were treacherous as I made my way up to the remote chalet I'd rented for my photography retreat. I'm David Morgan, and after months of shooting crowded city streets, I was looking forward to capturing the raw beauty of the Alps in winter. The rental listing had promised isolation and stunning views. It delivered on both counts, though perhaps more isolation than I'd bargained for. I arrived just as dusk was settling over the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. The chalet stood alone on the mountainside, a traditional wooden structure that seemed to grow right out of the rocky terrain. The nearest neighbor was at least 2 miles down the winding road, their lights barely visible through the dense pine forest. The interior of the chalet was rustic but comfortable, with exposed wooden beams and a massive stone fireplace. The host, a man named Marcus who spoke with an unusual accent I couldn't quite place, had left detailed instructions about the property. Something about his handwriting struck me as odd. It was full of strange symbols I assumed were local decorative flourishes. After unpacking my camera gear, I spent the evening reviewing shots from my journey up the mountain. The silence outside was absolute, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Around 9, That silence was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Given the chalet's isolation, the sound was so unexpected that at first I thought I'd imagined it. Then it came again, more insistent this time. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his 40s wearing traditional alpine clothing, complete with a feathered hat. When I opened the door, he seemed startled to see me, as if he'd expected someone else. Without a word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The encounter left me unsettled, but I rationalized it as a local perhaps looking for the previous tenant. The next night, however, the same man returned, knocking at precisely the same time. Again he seemed surprised by my presence, and again he left without speaking. This time, though, I caught a glimpse of something around his neck. What looked like an ancient pendant with symbols similar to those in Marcus's handwriting. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence of the mountains had taken on an oppressive quality, and the darkness outside the windows seemed alive somehow. Around 3 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of chanting. Multiple voices were moving around the chalet, speaking in what sounded like an ancient dialect. Peering through the window, my blood ran cold. At least 20 figures in hooded robes were moving through the snow, carrying torches and forming some kind of pattern around the chalet. Their chants grew louder, more urgent, and I recognized some of the symbols they were drawing in the snow, the same ones from Marcus's notes. In a panic, I reached for my phone, but the signal had vanished. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and suddenly all the figures stopped moving. In perfect synchronization, they turned to face the chalet. Through their hoods, I could see their eyes reflecting the torchlight, fixed on my window. A pounding at the door made me jump. Then another and another. They were trying to enter from all sides. I barricaded myself in the bedroom, desperately trying to get a signal on my phone. Through the walls, I could hear them speaking in that strange language, their voices getting closer. Just when I thought they would break through, a helicopter's spotlight cut through the darkness. The Mountain Rescue Service, responding to an emergency signal I hadn't sent, illuminated the scene. But instead of finding a group of cultists, they found only empty snow. The symbols drawn in the snow had vanished, the torches were gone, and no footprints marked the pristine white surface. When they questioned Marcus about the chalet's history, he denied any knowledge of strange occurrences. But in his office, they found ancient texts describing a mountain cult that had once used the site for their rituals. A cult that believed in opening doorways to other realms during the winter solstice. The dates of my stay, I later learned, had coincided exactly with their traditional ceremony. I never returned to the mountains, but sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I still hear those chants echoing in my dreams, and I wake to find strange symbols traced in the condensation on my windows. I was working as a Glovo delivery driver that night. Being a student, I needed some extra cash, and night shifts usually paid better. It was around midnight, and the streets of our small town were unusually quiet. I was cruising around in my beat-up Honda, some indie rock playing softly on the radio, waiting for orders to pop up on my phone. When the notification finally came through, I barely glanced at the details before accepting. Orders were scarce at this hour, and I couldn't afford to be picky. The pickup was from Mario's Pizza, a 24-hour joint known for their extra cheesy pies and questionable health inspection records. The drive to the delivery location took about 15 minutes. The roads were empty, streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. My GPS guided me into what I could only describe as the forgotten part of town. Unlike the well-maintained business districts I usually delivered to, this area felt wrong. The buildings loomed like dead giants, their windows dark and empty. Overgrown vegetation crept up the walls, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. The GPS directed me to turn into a parking lot beside what appeared to be an old elementary school. The 3-story building stood dark against the night sky, its red brick facade stained with years of neglect. Graffiti decorated the lower walls, and several windows were boarded up. I'd heard rumors about this place. Riverside Elementary closed down 5 years ago due to budget cuts. As I pulled up, my phone lit up with a message from the customer. "I see you. Please bring it to the blue side door near the playground." I responded with a quick "okay" and grabbed the pizza bag. The playground equipment cast twisted shadows in my headlights, the swings moving slightly in the autumn breeze. I found the blue door easily enough, its paint peeling, revealing layers of older colors beneath. The handle turned smoothly, surprisingly unlocked. Inside, emergency lights cast a sickly yellow glow through the hallway, illuminating rows of old lockers and educational posters that still clung to the walls. The moment I stepped inside, I heard it, the distinct click of the door locking behind me. My heart jumped into my throat as I yanked the handle. Nothing. I was trapped. The pizza bag slipped from my trembling hands as the reality of my situation sank in. Then came the sound, footsteps, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. My survival instincts kicked in. I sprinted down the hallway, past classrooms with chairs still stacked on desks, past a trophy case with faded ribbons and dusty awards. Another door at the end of the hall unlocked, thank God. I burst through into what must have been the cafeteria. The sound of running footsteps grew closer. In the dim light, I spotted a fire exit on the far wall. As I ran, I caught a glimpse of a figure entering the cafeteria behind me, tall, moving with purpose. The fire exit slammed open as I hit it at full speed, triggering an alarm that shattered the night's silence. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but of course, they found nothing. The building was empty. The officer told me the school had been scheduled for demolition next month, and no one should have been inside. They found no cameras, no evidence, just my abandoned delivery bag in that dark hallway. Sometimes I still drive past that school, now demolished and replaced with a shopping center. I never take night deliveries anymore. Whatever was waiting for me in that building, I'm grateful I never found out what they had planned. I had been working at Night Slice for about 2 months. The pay wasn't great, but the tips made up for it, especially during the late shift. Our little pizzeria, tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store, stayed open until midnight. And surprisingly, we got steady orders right up until closing. That evening, around 11:30, an order came in that would change everything. The fog had rolled in thick from the coast, making the autumn night even more eerie than usual. I grabbed the order without much thought, 2 large pepperoni pizzas and breadsticks, and headed out into the misty darkness. The GPS took me in an unfamiliar direction, away from the usual suburban deliveries and toward the coastline. Most people thought this area was just empty beaches and old fishing spots, but there was actually an abandoned stretch of motels from the 70s, back when our town had dreams of becoming a tourist destination. The road narrowed as I approached the coast, the fog so dense my headlights could barely cut through it. The directions led me to a crumbling entrance with a salt-worn sign that read Ocean View Motel Vacancy. The parking lot was cracked asphalt, with weeds pushing through like skeletal fingers. The motel spread out in a horseshoe shape, facing the invisible ocean beyond. Most of the rooms were dark, their windows reflecting my headlights like dead eyes. The order specified room 13, which seemed almost too perfect in its cliché. I parked near the office, its neon open sign flickering weakly in the fog. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided an ominous backdrop as I made my way to the room. The metal stairs leading to the second floor creaked under my feet, the railing loose and rusted. Just as I reached room 13, my phone buzzed with a text from the customer. Doors unlocked. Please leave it on the table inside. Tips there too. Something felt off, but I had done similar drops before. The door handle turned easily, revealing a dark room illuminated only by the dim parking lot lights filtering through the window. Hello, I called out, stepping cautiously inside. Night slice delivery. The room smelled musty, like old carpet and sea salt. I could make out the shapes of a bed and a small table near the window. As I moved toward the table, I heard a creak from the bathroom door. Before I could react, a figure burst out, moving surprisingly fast in the darkness. I stumbled backward, the pizzas falling from my hands as another shape appeared in the doorway behind me. The first man lunged forward, his face twisted with malicious intent, but I managed to dodge, slipping past him. I collided with the second person, both of us tumbling onto the wet walkway outside. Somehow, I scrambled to my feet first and ran. The sound of heavy footsteps followed me down the metal stairs, the whole structure shaking with our movement. I reached my car and sped out of there, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see 2 figures standing in the fog, watching me escape. They disappeared into the mist as I turned onto the main road. The police investigation went nowhere. The room had been broken into, the phone number was fake, and they had paid with a prepaid card. The motel's security cameras had stopped working years ago, leaving no evidence of what happened. The Ocean View Motel still stands there, slowly decaying in the salt air. Sometimes on foggy nights, I see lights on in room 13. But I know better now. Some deliveries aren't worth the tip. I'd been working delivery jobs since I was 20, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. The order came in around 9:30. A simple delivery to what was supposed to be just another house. I'd been doing this long enough to know every street and shortcut in our town, but this address was different. The directions took me down Old Mill Road, a narrow stretch of pavement that wound through what used to be a thriving mining community. Most people had moved away decades ago when the mines closed, leaving behind scattered houses and overgrown yards. The few residents who stayed were mostly elderly folks who'd lived there their whole lives. The late September air was unusually cold as I drove deeper into the forgotten neighborhood. Bare tree branches created twisted patterns against the starlit sky, and the only sound was my tires crunching over fallen leaves. After about 15 minutes of driving, my GPS suddenly announced I had arrived at my destination. I pulled over, confused. The screen showed I was exactly where I needed to be, but all I could see were the remnants of old stone walls and chimneys poking through thick vegetation, the ruins of the original mining settlement. No houses, no lights, no signs of life at all. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone to call the customer. As it rang, something caught my eye, a pale blue light flickering between the trees, deep in the ruins. It glowed for just a moment before disappearing, like someone waving a lantern. "Hello," a man's voice answered, sounding distant and oddly hollow. I explained I was having trouble finding the address. He chuckled, a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Oh, you're in the right place. There's an old path near the stone wall. Just follow it in." I stepped out of my car, the cold air biting at my face. My flashlight beam revealed what he was talking about: a narrow dirt path, barely visible among the dead leaves and undergrowth. It looked more like a deer trail than anything meant for humans. As I stood there debating what to do, the blue light appeared again, closer this way. Something about it seemed wrong. It didn't move like a flashlight or lantern. It seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "I can see you're here," the voice came through my phone, though I hadn't heard it ring. "Just follow the path. We're waiting, we're waiting." Those words sent ice through my veins. I set the food bag on the ground next to my car, my instincts screaming at me to leave. As I reached for my car door, I heard it, the sound of multiple footsteps crunching through leaves, coming from different directions in the darkness. I jumped into my car and slammed the door just as the blue light appeared again, this time right at the edge of the trees. In its glow, I caught a glimpse of something that made me forget how to breathe. Multiple shadows moving between the ruins, all heading toward my car. I threw the car into drive and sped away, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw the blue light rise above the trees, brighter than before, illuminating several dark figures standing on the road where I'd just been. The police searched the area the next day, but found nothing except centuries-old ruins and my abandoned delivery bag. The phone number was disconnected, and the address didn't exist in any current records. The officer mentioned that there had been other reports over the years: strange lights, unexplained sounds, people going missing. I quit delivery work after that night. Sometimes, when I drive past Old Mill Road, I see that blue light floating among the ruins. But now I know better than to stop, no matter who might be calling. I was driving back from a late-night photo shoot in the mountains. My client lived in this beautiful but remote cabin, perfect for the moody autumn portfolio we were working on. It was around 2 in the morning, and a light drizzle had started to fall, making the winding mountain roads even more treacherous than usual. I probably should have accepted his offer to stay overnight, but I had an early morning wedding shoot the next day that I couldn't reschedule. The serpentine road stretched ahead of me, my headlights cutting through the misty darkness. while the rhythmic sound of my wipers kept me company. About 20 minutes into my drive, my headlights illuminated something unusual in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, perhaps a bit too hard, causing my camera equipment to shift in the back seat. There, standing upright in the center of my lane, was a large hiking backpack. It was one of those expensive ones that serious mountaineers use, just standing there as if someone had carefully placed it. The sight was deeply unsettling. I stayed in my car for a moment, engine running, considering my options. The pack was blocking my lane, and on these narrow mountain roads, going around it meant taking a blind curve on the wrong side. I remembered reading something in the local news about missing hikers in these mountains over the past few months. Something about this didn't feel right. I decided to carefully maneuver around it. As I passed, my headlights swept across the guardrail, and I could see the steep drop-off beyond it. The rain was getting heavier now. Just 5 minutes later, I came across another obstacle. A white van was parked in the middle of the road, hazard lights blinking in the rain. The orange lights created an eerie strobe effect in the mist. I stopped a safe distance behind it and honked twice. No response. Slowly, I began to edge around the van. As I pulled alongside, I noticed there was no one in the driver's seat. The van looked well-maintained, unlike an abandoned vehicle. Through the passenger window, I could see camping equipment neatly arranged in the back. After passing the van, I glanced in my rearview mirror and noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a small car, almost completely hidden in the shadows of the trees off the road. If I hadn't been looking carefully, I would have missed it entirely. I'd only driven another minute when my headlights caught a figure standing in the road. He was wearing an expensive-looking rain jacket and holding an umbrella. He smiled and held up his hand, gesturing for me to stop. Despite the rain and the late hour, he looked perfectly put together. Too put together for someone who'd supposedly broken down on a mountain road. He approached my car, still smiling. "Excuse me," he called out through the rain. "Did you pass a white van back there?" "It's mine." I ran out of fuel and had to walk to find help. His story made no sense. Why would he walk further up the mountain, instead of down toward the nearest town? As he spoke, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. There was someone else, trying to stay hidden in the trees beside the road. The man was still talking, but my eyes were fixed on a metallic glint among the trees, probably from a weapon. Without hesitation, I rolled up my window and floored the accelerator. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man's pleasant expression transform into something terrifying. He screamed and slammed his fists against my back window as I sped away. I called the police as soon as I had cell service again. When they investigated, the van was gone, but they found the car I'd spotted. Inside, they discovered evidence linking it to 3 hikers who had disappeared in these mountains over the past 2 months. The man I encountered was never caught, but the missing hikers' backpacks were found hidden in a nearby cave, including the one I'd seen in the road. They believe he'd been using the backpack and van to force people to stop, probably counting on the natural instinct of hikers to help their own. I was lucky I'd decided to keep driving that night. Sometimes I still think about what might have happened if I'd gotten out of my car to move that backpack. I had been working at Ocean Sushi Bar for for about 6 months, juggling the job with my marine biology classes at the local college. The tips were decent, and being able to make deliveries in my own car meant extra cash for textbooks. Plus, our small seaside town was usually pretty peaceful, despite the recent string of robberies in the area. It was a typical spring evening, with a light drizzle painting the streets with reflections of the streetlights. My shift started at 5, and it had been steadily busy until around 8, when things suddenly went quiet. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the restaurant's windows. Around 9, an online order came in 3 specialty rolls and miso soup. The address was in one of those oceanfront neighborhoods where the houses were spaced far apart, connected by winding roads that followed the coastline. I loaded the order into my car and headed out. The roads were pretty empty, just the occasional car passing by. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A dark sedan had pulled onto the road behind me. They maintained a constant distance, never passing even though I was driving below the speed limit due to the rain. When I turned onto the coastal road, I checked my mirror again. A few seconds later, those same headlights appeared around the corner. That's when I started to feel uneasy. What were the chances they were heading to the same secluded neighborhood? The road curved along the coastline, the ocean barely visible through the rain and darkness on one side, dense trees on the other. Houses appeared occasionally, some right by the road, others set back on private drives. I kept checking my mirrors, watching the car behind me. Finally, I spotted the house number I was looking for. I turned into the driveway, and to my relief, the sedan continued past. I felt silly for being so paranoid. The driveway was long, winding through a small grove of pine trees before opening up to the house. The house was dark except for a porch light. I got out with the delivery bag and rang the doorbell. No answer. I waited and rang again. After what felt like forever, a light came on inside, and a woman in her 50s opened the door, wearing a bathrobe and looking confused. "Yes?" she asked, squinting at me. "I have your sushi delivery," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew something was wrong. "I didn't order any sushi," she said, frowning. "I was just about to go to bed." My stomach dropped. I apologized and turned to leave, my mind racing. Halfway to my car, I looked up and froze. The same dark sedan from before was parked behind my car, blocking the driveway. Its engine was running, visible puffs of exhaust rising in the rain. Before I could process what was happening, 4 car doors opened simultaneously. 4 men got out, all wearing dark hoodies and face masks. One of them had his hand in his pocket, gripping something I couldn't see. My heart started pounding. They started moving toward me quickly. Without thinking, I dropped the delivery bag and ran. Not toward the house. I didn't want to endanger the woman, but toward the trees beside the driveway. I could hear footsteps behind me, splashing through puddles and someone shouting. I ran through the pine trees, branches whipping at my face, my shoes slipping on wet pine needles. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind me. The rain was coming down harder now, but I didn't stop. I kept running until I broke through the trees onto another property, where I finally saw lights and people. I called 911 from a neighbor's house. By the time the police arrived, the men in both cars were gone. They never found my car. Later, the police told me there had been similar incidents in neighboring towns' criminals using fake food delivery orders to target drivers. They suspected the group was behind the recent string of robberies too. I quit my delivery job the next day. Sometimes I still think about what might have happened if I hadn't run, or if I had run toward the house instead of the trees. These days, I only do deliveries during daytime hours and only in busy areas. But every time I see a dark sedan in my rearview mirror, I can't help but check to see if it's following me. I've been driving trucks for 8 years now, mostly doing long-haul routes through the Southwest. The summer nights are usually my favorite, the air cooling down after the scorching day, stars scattered across the desert sky, and the peaceful solitude of the open road. This particular night, I was hauling refrigerated goods from Phoenix to Dallas. Left town around 6 in the evening, planning to make my first stop around 11. The road stretched endlessly ahead, my truck's headlights illuminating the dusty asphalt and the occasional tumbleweed. Around 11, I pulled into a small truck stop just off the interstate. It was one of those older places with a single fluorescent sign buzzing above the entrance. I parked my rig, grabbed my thermal mug, and headed inside for some fresh coffee and a quick bathroom break. When I came back out, the night air was still warm, carrying that distinct desert scent of sage and sand. I climbed back into my cab and took a moment to enjoy my coffee, scanning the nearly empty parking lot. Only 3 other trucks were there, a quiet night by any standards. That's when I noticed him, a figure standing in the shadows behind the building, barely visible in the dim light from the sign. He was just watching, not moving, not smoking, not on a phone, just staring in my direction. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I started up my engine and pulled back onto the interstate. The coffee was doing its job, keeping me alert as I watched the empty road ahead. About 30 minutes later, I caught something in my side mirror, just a quick flash of light, like a reflection. I kept checking my mirrors, but the road behind me seemed empty. Then it happened again. This time I caught it better, a black SUV, riding so close to my trailer I could barely see it in my mirrors. No headlights, just ghosting along behind me in the dark. I grabbed my radio. Breaker 19, this is Ice Queen. Anybody out there got eyes on a black SUV running dark on I-40 eastbound, mile marker 120? A familiar gravelly voice crackled back. Ice Queen, this is Old Jack. I'm about 10 miles ahead of you. Haven't seen anything yet, but I'll keep watch. Everything okay? Before I could respond, the SUV suddenly appeared in my left mirror, still running dark. I switched lanes and it followed. Switched back, it followed again. My heart was starting to race. Jack, this vehicle's playing games. No plates, no lights, riding my tail. Copy that, Ice Queen. Got a state trooper station coming up in about 15 miles. Want me to call it in? Before I could answer, the SUV dropped back and disappeared again. I kept driving for another 2 hours, tense and alert, but there was no sign of it. By 3 in the morning, my eyes were burning with fatigue. I decided to pull into a rest area for a few hours of sleep. It was just a simple parking area off the highway. No buildings, just a stretch of pavement surrounded by desert. I killed the engine, but kept my hand on the key. The silence of the desert pressed in around me as I reclined my seat. I must have dozed off quickly because the next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes to darkness. Something had woken me. Then I saw him, a face right outside my window, eyes wide and unblinking, staring in at me. I jerked upright as he reached for the door handle. I twisted the key and slammed the transmission into gear. As my truck roared to life, I caught movement in my mirror. The black SUV was parked behind me, its engine running. I grabbed the radio and called for help as I pulled out of the rest area. The SUV followed for a few miles before suddenly turning off onto a dirt road and disappearing into the desert night. Later, when I described everything to the state troopers, they told me there had been several reports of a similar vehicle in the area, usually targeting lone trucks at night. They never caught them, and I never found out what they wanted. These days, I still drive the same route, but I don't stop at that truck stop anymore, and I never sleep at rest areas. Sometimes, on dark nights in the desert, I still check my mirrors for vehicles running without lights, ghosting along behind my trailer. As the autumn was wrapping its cold fingers around the last remnants of warmth, my friend Lily and I decided to take an evening drive to Lake Morrison. I had grown up in this area, spending countless hours exploring the dense forest that surrounded the murky waters. Lily, who had only moved here recently, was eager to experience the wild beauty of these places, especially at night. I loved sharing spooky podcast stories and watching horror movies, which, as it turned out, would serve us well that night. We set out in my old Volkswagen Passat, a reliable 2003 model that had carried me through countless adventures on these winding roads. The familiar paved route eventually gave way to a narrow gravel path. Just beside the transition point lay a small clearing where people often parked their trucks and boats. As we passed by, I noticed the clearing was empty, typical for this time of night. It was 10 in the evening, and the autumn fog had begun its nightly dance over the lake's surface. We drove further, passing the old fishing cabin that hadn't seen life in years. The wooden dock stretched into the lake like a skeletal finger pointing into darkness. Through the thick mist, I caught sight of something unusual, a single amber light glowing near the shoreline. "Well, damn," I muttered, immediately regretting my choice of words when I saw Lily's concerned expression. This was, after all, her first nighttime excursion to the lake. "What's wrong?" Lily asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "That light over there," I gestured toward the shore. "I've never seen it before. I mean, some people fish at night, but that spot." I trailed off, remembering that the area was private property, marked by warning signs riddled with bullet holes, a clear message from owners tired of trespassers. My hands tapped nervously on the steering wheel as conflicting thoughts raced through my mind. I wanted to show Lily the beauty of the fog-covered lake under the autumn moon, but something felt off. Years of listening to true crime stories had taught me to trust my instincts. "I'm sorry, Lily," I said, slowing the car. "I know you wanted to see the lake, but that light shouldn't be there. I've never seen anyone use that section of the shore, especially not at night." Lily, bless her heart, didn't complain when I started to turn the car around. That's when the engine sputtered and died. "No, no, no," I whispered, turning the key. The starter whined, but the engine refused to catch. Through the fog, I noticed movement, flashlight beams dancing between the trees. Emma, Lily's voice was barely audible. "There's a truck pulling into the clearing we just passed." My blood ran cold as I tried the engine one more time. This time it roared to life. "Hold on to something," I warned. "This might get rough." I reversed faster than I should have on the gravel road, my headlights illuminating a scene that still haunts me. At least 6 men rushing around a white pickup truck, unloading what looked like a small boat. One man was pulling out something that gleamed in my headlights. I didn't wait to see more. I threw the car into drive and sped toward the main road, gravel spraying behind us. In my rearview mirror, I saw one of the men run after us before disappearing into the fog. "Were those people there when we drove past earlier?" I asked, pushing the old Volkswagen to 70 miles per hour on the empty road. "No," Lily replied, her voice steady despite the situation. "Definitely not. We had 8 miles of straight road ahead before reaching civilization." Every few seconds, I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights emerging from the fog behind us. We didn't slow down until we reached the well-lit parking lot of a busy diner. We sat in the car, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why would anyone need to unload a boat in such a hurry, in the dark, on private property? Why did they appear so suddenly? And what was that light we saw? Lily suggested they might have been helping someone in trouble, but there was no public access to the lake from that point, and all the land was clearly marked as private property. I'm grateful we left when we did, so we didn't have to find out their true intentions. To this day, I still drive past that lake, but I never stop after sunset. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some nights are better spent in well-lit places, surrounded by other people. They say you inherit your temper from one of your parents. I got mine from my father. My mother was more of a slow burner. She'd keep everything bottled up until one day she'd explode, listing every single thing I'd done wrong in the past year. But my father, he'd let you know exactly what you'd done wrong the moment you did it. And if you were smart, you'd make yourself scarce, preferably on the other side of town. I definitely took after my father. When something made me angry, everyone within earshot would know about it. Sometimes this hot temper got me into trouble, but on one rainy evening in 1982, it probably saved my life. I was 20 years old, working part-time at River Valley Mall while attending college full-time. The mall was one of those sprawling 2-story buildings with a massive parking structure attached to it. Being just a retail worker, I had to park on the outer edges of the parking garage, leaving the prime spots for customers. The walk never bothered me. I was young, fit, and enjoyed the exercise. That particular evening, I wasn't just walking to my car, I was storming to it. Mr. Thompson, the store manager, had just informed me that I hadn't gotten the office position I'd applied for. Looking back now, working full-time while maintaining my college schedule would have been impossible. But at that moment, all I could think about was how unfair it all was. The rain was coming down in sheets as I made my way through the near-empty mall. My heels clicked angrily against the tiled floor, each step fueled by frustration. I hadn't lost my temper in the store, but I carried it with me like a storm cloud as I pushed through the heavy doors into the parking garage. By 9:30, The garage was mostly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating pools of harsh light between long shadows. I vaguely remember passing a woman getting into her car on the second level. But after that, it was just me and the echo of my footsteps, until I noticed someone else's footsteps behind me. I was climbing the ramp to the fourth level where I'd parked, and the footsteps seemed to be getting closer. At that point in my life, I was used to male attention. I was pretty with my glasses on and turned heads when I took them off, once causing a man to walk straight into a lamppost. So if I thought about the footsteps at all, I assumed it was just some guy planning to ask me out. Boy, did he pick the wrong moment. As I reached for my keys, hearing the footsteps speed up behind me, I spun around 180 degrees without breaking stride. Thank you, college dance classes, and snapped, what? With enough venom to make a cobra think twice. The man's face, just a few yards away, transformed from a predatory leer to complete shock. His body went rigid, and he made this awkward, mechanical turn away from me. After a few more stiff steps, he disappeared back through the door to the fourth level. Strange, I thought, but I was too angry about the promotion to really process it. I got into my car, started it up, and drove home, still fuming about Mr. Thompson and his decision. As I passed the lower levels, I caught glimpses of the same man ducking between cars, as if he was hiding. It wasn't until much later that night, while venting to my coworker Patty about the promotion, that I mentioned the odd encounter. Patty went pale and pointed out how dangerous the situation could have been. I laughed it off, saying the guy was lucky to have escaped my bad mood. About a month later, whispers started circulating around the mall about women being followed to their cars and assaulted in the parking structure. The mall tried to keep it quiet, but female employees started parking closer to the entrance or walking out in groups. Some had their boyfriends or husbands pick them up after their shifts. I didn't think much about my encounter until we learned that they'd caught the guy, a slim, young man who used a knife to threaten his victims. That's when it finally hit me, my temper, which had always seemed like a liability, had actually protected me that night. The man who turned away from me so abruptly was probably surprised to have his predatory routine disrupted by unexpected anger instead of fear. I felt guilty for not reporting the incident. My description might have helped catch him sooner, but I'd been so consumed by my anger over the promotion that I hadn't recognized the danger. Perhaps it was after encountering me that he started carrying a knife, realizing he needed something more than surprise to overpower his victims. The River Valley Mall eventually changed its security policies, allowing employees to park wherever they wanted. By then, I had moved on to a different job, but I never forgot that night. I'm sure some people might find it hard to believe that pure anger could deter an attacker, but anyone who knew me back then would understand completely. Sometimes I wonder if that's why I never felt that level of confidence again, because I learned that night just how dangerous the world could be, even in familiar places. But I also learned that sometimes what we consider our worst traits might just turn out to be our best protection. Sometimes it's good to lose your temper. My boyfriend Mike and I were excited to try out our new camping setup, a tent that could attach to the car for extra storage space. We had planned a weekend of hiking through the blooming spring forests, followed by stargazing from our campsite. The weather forecast promised clear skies, perfect for our first camping trip of the season. All the state parks were booked solid. Apparently, everyone had the same idea about enjoying the first warm weekend of spring. After searching online, we found this website that worked like Airbnb for private camping spots. We came across this interesting listing: a 100-acre apple orchard just 15 minutes away from our planned hiking trail. The property seemed perfect. It had basic amenities like restrooms and outdoor showers, allowed campfires, and you could drive right up to your camping spot. The old apple barn had been converted into a sort of community space, complete with a small kitchen. What really caught our attention were the reviews. 3 5-star ratings talking about the peaceful atmosphere and beautiful surroundings. The owner, Tom, communicated only through text messages, but seemed friendly enough. We arrived later than our planned 11 a.m. check-in time, but kept him updated about our delay. And we finally pulled up to the address. We found ourselves facing an impressive old barn with fairy lights strung across its weathered wooden facade. While we were trying to get enough signal to text Tom about our arrival, an older man in his 60s pulled up in a green utility vehicle. He introduced himself as Tom's brother-in-law, explaining that Tom was busy with the early spring pruning in the orchard. The man was covered in wood chips and dirt, as if he'd been working outside all day. He told us we could set up anywhere on the property, and even offered to show us around on his utility vehicle. Mike, clearly uncomfortable, politely declined and asked about the boundaries of the camping area. The man casually mentioned that we could camp anywhere, even offering to help if our car got stuck in the spring mud. When we asked about cell service, he made a joke about reception being better on one side of the barn than the other. Something about his delivery felt off. His accent didn't match the local way of speaking, despite him claiming to be from the area. We decided to explore on foot first. The barn was well maintained and surprisingly modern inside, with string lights creating a cozy atmosphere even in daylight. The kitchen looked recently renovated, though we were warned not to drink the tap water. Behind the barn stood an old stone building that must have been the original cider press house, and beyond that, trails led into the budding orchard. After a short walk through rows of twisted apple trees just starting to show their spring buds, we found a perfect spot near a small stream, using our car as a windbreak. We left to grab dinner in town and asked Tom about the fire pit policy. He texted back, saying they'd leave one by the barn for us to use. When we returned about 90 minutes before sunset, the barn's fairy lights were off. We assumed they were on a timer to save electricity. The fire pit hadn't been delivered yet, but we started setting up our camp in the humid spring air. A brief shower forced us to wait in the car, playing cards until it passed. Needing to use the restroom, we walked back toward the barn. As we passed the old cider house, we heard strange, shuffling sounds from inside. I tried to convince Mike it was just the old wood settling, but something felt wrong. At the barn, the lights were still off. We found the fire pit had been delivered, but when we went inside to use the restroom, none of the light switches worked. We assumed the power was out from the rain. But as we stepped 10 feet away from the barn, we heard a mechanical hum, and the lights flickered back on. We changed direction to use the bathroom, and as soon as we stepped inside, the power cut again. I nervously joked to Mike, maybe they're watching us. The moment we stepped outside, the lights came back on. Mike said we needed to leave, and I felt the same primal fear gripping my chest. We went back to grab the fire pit since we'd moved it, and the barn lights began to flicker eerily. We walked briskly back to our campsite, growing up in rural areas. I knew running would only make things worse. Our 30-minute setup was torn down in 5 minutes flat. Just as we pulled onto the main road, Mike looked back and saw a figure standing by the cider house, watching us leave. Almost immediately, my phone lit up with a text from Tom offering us shelter in the barn if the rain had ruined our camping plans. We drove straight to a hotel in town, splurging on a nice room for safety. The elderly receptionist who checked us in looked troubled when we told her what happened. She asked if we'd seen the recent news about disappearing couples in the area. 3 couples had gone missing while camping, and one was found barely alive on the highway with severe injuries. Back in our room, I texted Tom to say we wouldn't be staying. His reply was unnervingly cheerful. "Thank you for staying with us." I can still feel that primal fear when I think about that night, that instinct telling us something was deeply wrong. That feeling of being watched still makes my throat tight when I recall it. To the figure by the cider house who watched us drive away, let's never meet again.